of school. My mom at 47 got cancer and died right there in the home. And I had 6 brothers and sisters, and it was quite an experience to try to be the oldest boy in the family and have a 4-year-old brother without a mom. So that's where it all started. That's where my rock was my mom. So as time progressed, after about 1.5 years after she passed away, I went into the U.S. Navy, and I thought they were fixing to draft me anyway, so I had to get on in. And so I wanted to go the one I chose. I chose the Navy. I had to give more years, but it was I think good because God had something in mind for me. I had my mama's younger brother was a pastor and a church planter, and he had just started a church out in Mobile, Alabama, and he was there and he was praying for me. And you know, that's where things really start, when people start getting concerned about you and start praying for you and start making things happen. I like to think about 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing, because that's how my life started. Somebody started praying for me, and then it wasn't long before he not only prayed for me, he put legs on those prayers and had a preacher come over to the base that I was stationed at in Pensacola and said, I want you to come to my church. And I wasn't particularly, I was away from home, you know, for the first time. I wasn't particularly looking for a church at that time. But he convinced me I needed to come to his church, so I did. I visited a few times, and it wasn't long before he asked me if I'd ever been saved, and I said no. I said I've been to church a lot, but nobody ever asked me if I'd ever got saved. So he sat down and showed me how to get saved, and you know, the Lord saved me right then, because he cared, and my uncle cared, and they prayed, and that's sort of my life thing. I began to grow in the Lord there, and it wasn't long before, instead of carrying the guys to the bar, I was carrying them to the church. We saw as many as 14 from that little helicopter training base I was on. It was where the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard, and the astronauts all trained. So we got to see the astronauts back when they were there. But anyway, that's where I got started off, and God began to work on my heart. And then the next thing I know, there was a deacon in the church that was teaching a Bible study on Tuesday, and he said, I'd like to have you in my Bible study. So I began to go there, and it wasn't long. I just couldn't get enough of the church. Every time the doors was open, I was there. So I began to grow in the Lord, and then all of a sudden I got papers that said I needed to go to Kodiak, Alaska. Well, that same day, they had the great earthquake in '64. I don't know if you remember that, 9 point something. And Kodiak Island had a seismic wave that hit it. And the place that I moved in up there had 11-foot watermarks. And the downstairs where we kept our crash firefighting equipment. I was into crash firefighting while I was in the Navy, but the good part about that was that's where God sent me to really get close to Him. I had 24 on and 24 off, and I stayed right in the same building. We were 6 miles from the main base, and Kodiak had one small road that went to town that was paved. There was nothing else there. And the quake had caused such a damage to the city that there was boats on the hill there. I'm talking about big boats, 100-foot wide long boats sitting up on the hill as a result of that quake. But anyway, the Lord began to work through me there, and then from there I went to the USS Kitty Hawk over to Vietnam. And while I was there, God really helped us to we had a Southern Baptist chaplain, which was unusual to have one, and we had one. He went to New Orleans Seminary, and he was a really sharp one, and he began to let us have country church, we called it, on the ship. That's when we would start into the ports. We could have our church up in the front of the ship there where the anchors are, and on Sunday night they had a regular service for everybody else. It was sort of a unified service, but he allowed us to have our own service. And one of the boys that was just called to preach that was there in my division, he decided we were going to get together, and we prayed every day, and then we began to get Bible verses together, and every day he was all over the ship because he was our supply man, and we had the biggest division on the ship. So he went everywhere every day, and he would carry a Bible verse to all the different places. And it wasn't long before we began to see revival there on the ship. Guys began to get saved. We would hit port and just go visit missionaries, and it was amazing how God just blessed us, and we'd have sometimes 17 or more that would stay in the group and go out and take part in these things. And God just used us in many ways. And then when before I went up there, I went down to Naples to visit my brother who was working with my uncle down there in the plumbing business, trying to learn that. And because I was concerned about his salvation, and that's where I met Cynthia there at First Baptist. It wasn't anything planned, but it just worked out that way. And I met her, and that was it. Church on Sunday night, I sat with her, and I didn't see her anymore for a year. But we began to write during that year, and God began to move. And then we got engaged when I came back before I went over to Vietnam. And as a result of that, we had began a life together. As soon as I came back out of Vietnam, we got married down in First Baptist in Bonita Springs. I served there 10 years and had quite a different type ministries down there because we did a lot of ministry to the people that were working, the tomato growers and so forth. We used to spend a lot of time out there witnessing to them. We started a program that was taken up by the county, and then later on through a corporate program, they began to put us a man that was in charge of the whole South Florida, and he was out of Orlando. But that all started right down there where we would order movies in Spanish that would be delivered to us by Moody Bible Institute, and they would send us movies free, and we would, Christian movies, we'd put them on out at these camps, and the whole camp would turn out to hear the movie. If there was 100 or 150 in the camp, that's how many would show up there to hear these movies, and when you had an invitation, they all came forward. It was amazing, and God just blessed in so many ways. But that's been pretty well our way of living. You pray without ceasing. You have the attitude that God's always with you, and you're doing what God wants you to do in His will, and that's what really counts. And as we continue to pray, we took on my brother that was 8 years old right after we got married, and it wasn't long before we got into foster kids, and I don't know, we had around 75 through the years, but we had many other people too. We had a older man one time that stayed with us that was 90, and he was from Missouri and was one of the ones in Missouri that had Youth for Christ and had Billy Graham out for the first time, and he had the local people film it, and that was the first film Billy Graham ever had, was a film from the Youth for Christ rallies there in Third Baptist Church in Missouri, there in St. Louis. But anyway, he stayed with me. I mean, we just always had somebody in the house, it seemed like we were ministering. And then I moved to Jacksonville, and that's where I had to do something about my kids' educations, and the schools had just went to pot in Lee County because of especially south of where I was at in Bonita Springs, we were overloaded with the migrants there, and there was just no education hardly for my boys, and I had one boy that had a little bit of a learning curve, so it made it hard on him. So we took that as God leading us. We went up there. I worked with the pastor up there, had been praying for somebody to come up and help him with the buses. So I got up there and took over a bus ministry that had a Christian school with 1,200 in it, and we bused 400 kids every day to school and back home. And then we had kindergartners that we brought in also at noon that we had to deliver back, or by noon we had to deliver back. But I had 7 buses and 5 vans, and we run them everywhere. And it was amazing how God used us in that bus ministry with the school, but also with the church. And we usually ran 175 to 250 in our bus ministry to the children. And we would go into the worst part of Jacksonville there and pick up the really down and outers. And it was amazing how God just used us through that. And you would go down there and visit when you felt like you needed a bodyguard with you, but you already had God, so you didn't worry about it. And we did quite well in our ministry there. And then God continued to